Okay, I'll restart. Basically, I think we're in the hardware build out phase of AI. The cloud, people spent a lot of money. Dell and Cisco made a lot of money building out the infrastructure for cloud, but then SaaS ended up, an application layer built on top of the cloud ended up eclipsing the infrastructure and is three times, SaaS is three times bigger than internet infrastructure. In AI, we're in the infrastructure build out phase of AI, with Nvidia taking about 85% of all the AI money today. If you roll forward about 5 or 10 years, I think that AI applications will be 3 to 10 times bigger than infrastructure. And if you look, we're already seeing some value delivered in AI. You've probably read these headlines that Klarna is replacing people in their call centers, and JP Morgan's getting lots of better fraud detection. But again, I think that's just inning one of a very long game. Another thing which I'm sure you've read about in the press is that the cost of these underlying AI infrastructure models is going down in a crazy way. Just in the last sort of 2 years, the cost of tokens has gone down 97%. And that was at the end of Q4 2024. And then DeepSeek just came out a couple weeks ago, and that drove costs down like by another factor of 10. And the infrastructure cost is basically going to almost zero, which means that the value in the application layer, I think, is just improving over time. And so, where do I think there is AI, where the most value is going to be created in AI? In my opinion, and it might just be because that's where I invest, I think it's the application layer. And I describe that as the best opportunity as previously intractable problems that are today tractable with AI. And what I mean by that is, what is it about this new AI infrastructure that allows you to solve some business problem that was previously unsolvable? I'll talk about three companies that I have invested in that I believe are doing that. But a lot of people, you'd be surprised how many decks I get that former crypto investor, now an AI guy, or I'm writing HR software and it's HR with AI. I think these plans that are X software with AI are not solving some previously intractable problem. They're not using something inherent about the intelligence available in AI to solve a problem in a new way. And I think that's where the real value is going to be created. And one big category of those is making sense of previously unstructured and fragmented data. So you see a lot of people saying taking data from your ERP system and your email and all these different silos of data, and AI is very good at making sense of disparate data or data that's too big for humans to make sense of. I think that's one big category of value creation in AI. A second category is automation of repetitive tasks. And that's what you're seeing happening early in like call centers. If you're answering the same kind of question over and over again, there's no reason why humans should do that. AI is really good at answering very similar questions over and over again. I think another area of value creation is going to be in vertical markets. And that's where I do invest a lot. And those are not the general purpose tools that you're seeing from the large language models of OCR or text to speech recognition or generative AI for email. This is like really understanding the data and the requirements in a particular vertical industry. For example, I invested recently in a company called Newell AI, which is doing AI for supply chain planning in agricultural consumables like fertilizer and specialty chemicals. There's a whole bunch of data that they use, including real-time weather maps and trains schedules and trucking routes and stuff like that, that are specific to the way they operate their industry, that companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and the big large language models will be unlikely to integrate to their main models. So I think vertical market AI applications that understand a specific vertical market much better are going to be really huge value areas where value creation is going to be created. I also think enabling natural voice as an interface. We've had this mobile and web UI for all of our software applications for 30 years, but I'm starting to see some really interesting things in voice because the AI can do a better job at translating voice. And frankly, voice is a better user interface for a lot of apps than a screen is. And especially you're starting to see this in things like pizza ordering, and Domino's already has one of these. I think there'll be a lot of really interesting value created in changing people from apps back to a voice interface for certain types of applications, because voice is just inherently better than hunting and pecking on an app to build your pizza the right way. I also think that this idea of vibe coding, where people can type in what they want to an AI and have it write the code. I don't invest in those dev tools, but I think a lot of value will be created in those. And the last area where I think a lot of value is going to be created in AI is just generally for software for startup companies. Every startup company I've ever invested in, the gating factor has been their development velocity and how fast they can build anything. And today, with these co-pilots, you can build things faster and cheaper. When I first started investing in internet companies in maybe 2004, it cost a total of $5 million to start any internet companies, because you had to buy your own servers, you had to get a hosting thing, you had to buy lots of programmers. And today you can start an internet company for $100 in a domain and a few no-code tools. And AI is going to make that even cheaper. And I think it's going to increase the velocity of startups in general. The downside of that is that anybody with an idea can be copied, and you're going to get many more early stage companies competing with each other. And so then I've talked before on Twitter that I think the primary differentiator for most companies is going to be their distribution. So let me talk a little bit about areas where I think not a lot of value is going to be created despite people creating companies in there. And that is anything which is fundamentally a wrapper on an existing LLM, where you're trying to do some fancy prompt engineering or something. Many of those wrappers have already been sucked down into the LLMs because what they were doing was done in the next version of the LLM itself. I also think I've seen a lot of AI companies trying to create agent frameworks. I don't believe a startup will be able to successfully create an agent framework. OpenAI just announced their own agent framework. Anthropic has theirs. I think the core LLM vendors are going to be the ones creating the agent frameworks, and or big tech platform companies like Microsoft. I don't believe agent frameworks for startups are going to be a good value creator. I also don't think a lot of middleware, for example, today, if you're building voice, a lot of people in AI, a lot of people would use 11 Labs. And 11 Labs is basically middleware on top of OpenAI and Anthropic. They charge basically 100% markup on tokens. And every company I've ever looked at that started with them, it was easy. They had a better developer set of developer tools, easier to build software. But what eventually happened is that they realized that the premium they were paying for the middleware vendor was too much relative to the cost they needed. And so they ended up pulling out the 11 Labs and writing directly to OpenAI. I think the LLM providers are going to increase their accessibility, improve their APIs, and squeeze these middleware people out of the AI market. So I don't invest in AI middleware. I also don't invest in dev tools because I think the big LLM providers are going to do a really good job of writing their own dev tools. The other one I don't think a lot of value is going to be created in is SaaS app with AI. It's the quintessential example of that is I noticed all of these meeting transcription services, Otter and Fireflies and all of that came on, and they were basically an add-on to Zoom. And I didn't invest in any of them because I said Zoom's going to include that for free with your subscription, which they did. And now all of those businesses are in trouble. So I think if you're adding AI as a feature to an existing SaaS platform, you're not going to create a lot of enduring value because that SaaS platform provider is guaranteed has its own AI strategy, and they control the customer and they can include all of that for very inexpensively. I also don't think a lot of value be created for generative AI apps. Maybe potentially in video, but all these guys that are generating emails or generating images, my image on Twitter is a generated AI thing. And I think that's cool, but I don't know who's going to pay a lot of money to generate 20,000 different images of themselves. I'm not a big fan of generative AI generally. So let me talk quickly about three companies that I invested in and what they're doing and why I think they're interesting, and then I can take some questions. The first company is Wit Savi. I led the pre-seed. They just raised a seed round. What they're doing is building a database, a structured database of local government purchasing opportunities. There's about 1 trillion of local government purchasing if you add cities, counties, school districts, things like that. They were issuing those RFPs on 180,000 different websites. Many of them didn't even have RFPs. They were talking about those opportunities in city council meetings. Their spend data was all online through public records requests, PDF files. So basically, if you wanted to get a complete picture of all local government spending, you had to parse PDF files, listen to video calls. People tried to build this database 10 years ago by shipping PDF files to India and having them transcribed, but they were so expensive to do it that nobody built a big database. But with Civic, with AI, is listening to all these local government meetings with AI, transcribing it, extracting the vendors, extracting the purchasing opportunities, doing the public records requests with PDFs, extracting all the information with AI. And because of the capabilities enabled by the new AI platforms, they can build a structured database of who's spending what on what, who's supplying what to whom, and at a cost which is like 1,000th of what it would have been even 2 years ago. This is a previously intractable problem that is today tractable because of the AI infrastructure. And they took that AI infrastructure and applied it to a specific vertical, which is local government purchasing. And they're doing really well. And it's a perfect example of a previously intractable problem that was unlocked with these LLMs. A second one that I invested in is a company called Grow AI. We invested with Precursor Ventures. I met Alex and Alistair at a poker game. And when they took my money from me because they were better poker players, I was like, what are you building? I have to invest with you. And so that was pretty fun. So Alistair or Alex was a personal sales coach for 10 years. He ran an agency that charged $300 an hour to do sales coaching. And it worked really well. His salespeople got better. The problem was it was a $5,000 or $7,000 a year cost. So only salespeople that had $1 million quota could afford to do that. Plus, it was a business that was really hard to scale because every time he got new clients, he had to hire more consultants and it was a one-on-one thing. And when AI came along, I wonder if AI could do 80, 90% of the job for $50 a month. And he built it, and it turns out it can do a really good job. In fact, it can do a better job than your VP of sales or than he could do as an outside consultant. Because when he would meet with his people once every 2 weeks, for example, they would go through 2 or 3 of their top deals and he'd talk to the guy and work out what the major issues were. But he didn't, in his mind, have the context of every conversation that had ever been had with that account, every email, every note in Salesforce, all of that. AI can actually have the context, more context than a human could, and can do a better job than a human ever could of figuring out how to move this deal along, how to answer objections, how to when and how to reach out to people than a human ever could because it just has a larger context window. Plus, it can do it for about 5% of the cost of a human. So this is an example of taking something which very few people in business did because it was expensive and hard to do and making it available to everybody. And the analogy that I like to give here is this is a company that could potentially make a much bigger market than was before, kind of Uber did. In 2008, the total rideshare market was about $10 billion if you added up black cars and taxis. And Uber had problems raising money in the beginning because a lot of people said, if you get 5% of that market and you're making 5% of that, it's not a very big business. But what happened is that they increased supply and demand and drove price down in that market so that in 2024, there was approximately $180 billion of rideshare revenue. So there was $150 billion of opportunity for rideshare that was unlocked with the existence of this new software that increased supply and demand and lowered price. And I think something like Grow AI could do that too. Take this niche market, very expensive business service, sales coaching, make it available to every salesperson on the planet for a cheap price. And all of a sudden, the market size for that goes up 10 or 20x. I think that's going to create a lot of value. And a very similar one that I did was a company called Pinnacle, and they're doing the same kind of thing, but rather than sales coaching, it's executive coaching and management coaching, and it's for middle managers. And so, in the same way that a lot of CEOs might have a mentor or a life coach or a CEO coach that they pay $10,000 a year to help them be a better CEO, the middle management in companies tended to not have anybody. Maybe the CEO can check in with them once a month or something like that. But this is the same kind of thing. You're a middle manager at company X, and how do you get to be a better manager? This thing can read all your emails, read all your gong transcripts, read everything, and do career development for you. It's the same basic idea. Take an expensive thing that very few executives do and make it, democratize it, make it available to everybody, and make that coach actually better maybe than people in the past. Those are the ideas of where I think there will be a lot of value created and where I think there'll be less value created. So let me stop sharing there and take some questions. If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand or just go off mute and ask me a question about AI application value. Do we have any?
Yeah, I do have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, great. You mentioned that there's a lot of value that can be captured in the application layer, and you also mentioned that there's not much value in wrappers. Is there a bright line between those two things, or is there some gray area? And could a wrapper business, if it succeeds, morph into a more sustainable business?
Well, I know people who have written rappers that have very good lifestyle businesses that are making two, three, $5 million a year writing really thin rappers on top of OpenAI. And I think if that's what you want is a lifestyle small business, you can do that with a wrapper. What I'm talking about is more a venture scale, something that could potentially be worth $1 billion in the future. I don't think wrappers are going to be that. And that's my real issue with the wrappers. Yeah. Have you built something that's a wrapper? Is that why you're asking the question or
No, I've
considering it?
invested in a couple companies that I think may be wrappers, but I just,
Well, what's the difference between a wrapper to me and a vertical market thing is if in your application layer, one of the things, for example, wrappers are like a thing that configures a prompt and sends it to OpenAI, and it only sends to OpenAI. What you need to do to make it not a wrapper is to put more intelligence and routing in your intermediary layer and hopefully data. Like for example, Newell AI, which I invested in, it does make a certain number of calls to get particular information out of OpenAI, but they have a proprietary data integration to a real-time weather model, which OpenAI doesn't have access to, and they orchestrate the integration of the results from OpenAI with the real-time data from the weather thing. And so they've got some unique data integrations where they're not relying on the LLM, and that makes it more of an application. The other thing that makes it more of an application than a wrapper is if you have an orchestration layer that can replace the LLMs with different models over time as they improve. For example, if you're doing voice transcription and you write code which can switch between Anthropic or OpenAI or these other ones based on the kind of query, you've got to build to make it a real application, you got to build more intelligence in your application prior to the calls to the LLMs.
yeah, yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, I appreciate your answer. That's great.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Hey, Martin, I'm just going to add
Hey,
a
Samir.
comment to what you just said. So, since we talked, in fact, I ended up joining one of the boutique investment bank firm as a strategic advisor. And so I am seeing some
Cool.
very interesting companies right now. It's called Accredited Partners, but again, some very interesting companies coming through them who are, as you pointed out, maybe not a wrapper, but how they're using the multiple AI who are providing vertical from the voice to the search, plus the one of the different type of capabilities turning it into the function in a vertical space like ed tech or specifically for the some of the very specific businesses in the small businesses like vertical lines. They are reaching 5 to 6 million ARR in literally 8 months, 9 months, and they are now looking to see if they can end up finding an exit. So it is very interesting to see what's happening in the space.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. You're going to see a lot of companies get to that revenue level very quickly. The question is, can they keep growing or is that limited? But yeah, we're going to see faster growing companies than ever. You've already seen it. What was it? Cursor got to $75 million of ARR in 5 seconds or something like that. Yeah. Thank you, Samir.
Martin, I think another question around what you
Yeah.
just figured out about the value. Right now, I think that it is still a novice if you look at the multimodal LLMs, right? So everybody like you now, Microsoft is coming with own different ones competing with OpenAI. So you are going to see multiple different LLMs, again, some of the pretty large and some of the smaller one. So do you envision the value changing as the smaller LLMs in a very specific vertical starts coming up with very specific data set? So not just again as an infrastructure level, but very specific verticalized LLMs and the apps built on top of that, both of them creating a value.
Yes, and I would prefer that people, whether you need a custom LLM or something build on a proprietary data set. For example, one of the reasons Grok was able to meet the benchmark so quickly is that they had the Twitter data and nobody else has the Twitter data. I've seen a couple companies that are, because the question is, what do you train on? And a couple companies in healthcare, for example, that are training on healthcare records, and OpenAI didn't train on healthcare records, so OpenAI does a shitty job on healthcare records. I'm a big fan of having some proprietary data source either to train on or to integrate so that you can serve a specific vertical much better. I think there's going to be a lot of those vertical ones. And then the question is, how big is your vertical and is it big enough to support a big enough company? I think verticals like healthcare are big enough to support billion-dollar companies. I saw one company that was like reading all the medical research journals and doing a better job of answering questions about what's the scientific consensus about like cold plunges or rapamycin for longevity. And I asked that model a question about rapamycin and I asked OpenAI. And the answer that I got from a model which was specifically trained on only on research reports, because the problem that OpenAI has is they probably read those research reports, but they also read Reddit. And then OpenAI gives you a shitty answer because they're averaging the Reddit responses in with the research responses. So you look at something like that around medical research, and a model that's only trained on medical research is going to do a better job answering questions about medical research than a general model like OpenAI.
Makes sense. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting space there.
Yeah.
Hey Martin, I have one question.
Hey, Peter.
Do you have any advice for startups that are engaging with legacy companies or enterprises that want to retain their own data, but at the same time kind of leverage these startups that are making models, like custom-made models for them, like what you were saying?
A lot of legacy guy, you're going to see a combination of on-prem versus cloud models. And a lot of those legacy models, especially you look at places like pharma or banking, those guys don't want their people using open models. They want to use just on-prem models. So I think in some of those legacy industries, you'll see people installing open source models and running them inside the firewall. Just like in some of those industries, they're a lower adopter of the cloud versus other enterprises. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that kind of hits it. I don't know if this is the right forum to ask it bluntly, but we're currently in talks with fleets or companies that want to retain their data, but they want us to make like a model for them. So then how does it work in the sense that we make a model for them, but at the same time, we want to use that model to scale that for other companies as well? That makes sense.
Can't do that. You can't build a model for them and reuse it for somebody else. I think what you're talking about is more of a consulting. The people who are going to build the on-prem ones for people are going to end up being consulting companies using public open source models like Llama and installing it. But there's not going to be a lot of leverage there to create a startup to do that for multiple companies because you can't share the data or the training. So that could be an interesting consulting business that's unlikely to be a venture funded startup business.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Hey,
I'm a
Jeff?
co-founder of a company. We create structured data from unstructured health data, spin out of the Paul Allen Institute in Seattle. I guess I'm just curious, what
Oh,
other
cool.
applications have you seen outside of healthcare? We've found many in healthcare, but there's times when it would be nice to poke around at something that moves a little bit faster than health system.
Yeah. I mentioned the one which is with Civic, which
Yeah.
is sucking up all the local purchasing thing. And it's a slog. They have to do public records requests to like the city of Seattle to get purchasing history. And what they get is PDF files.
Yeah.
And another one that was doing, I saw somebody build one for investment research SEC filings, like 10 Qs. So
Yeah.
they were ingesting 10 Qs and creating intelligence out of those. Any area that has a lot of required public records filings, you could create an interesting AI accessible database where you could do natural language queries. And a lot of times that's the real value, just giving somebody the ability to do a natural language query versus a SQL Server query.
Yeah.
So are you in the AI2 incubator?
Yeah, we have gone through that. Yeah. It's
Okay.
called Health Elements AI. And
Okay.
yeah, we've started out with quality data, and then there's about 1 million chart review tasks in any hospital or health plan. That's a huge number of the different back office tasks that they have.
Yeah. You're starting in a tough area because that's all HIPAA controlled data, which is, I think, a little harder to build AI on top of. Some of the other use cases in healthcare that I've seen for AI that are easier to implement are things like post-operation patient follow-up and appointment bookings and farm drug compliance checking type applications driven by
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, we've managed to get some traction, and we have a unique data source that's helpful to us. But I guess it's more curiosity what other people are doing outside of healthcare.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in the supply chain as well.
Okay,
All right.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Does anybody else have any questions? Or Neil, how are you doing?
Find the unmute button. We're seeing a fair number of AI deals come through as this is with the Dessau Group deal review team that Martin has his fund administered by this team as well. And we probably see 50 deals a month coming through the deal review side, and probably at least 10 of those are AI. And so far, I would consider maybe 0 of them to be investable.
Really?
Most
What
of
about mine?
yours were not in the past couple months.
That's true.
I think you've definitely got a perspective which a lot of people I think lack, which is, does this really turn into a venture scale revenue potential? And does this get co-opted when this is the kind of the trope we used to say, is this company a bug fix? Is it a feature? Is it a product, or is it a company?
Yeah.
And I want to invest in companies. You're looking for things that are going to scale to venture and are not going to get co-opted when somebody just sees it. There's a unique data set, there's work involved, there's something seriously proprietary.
Yeah, or they're potentially democratizing something and creating a bigger market. That's why I like Grow and Pinnacle, because they're taking a business process that very few people did because it was expensive and hard to scale, and they're making it available to everybody at a very cheap price. That could potentially create a whole new market and make the market for that thing bigger than it ever could have been before, versus making a 10% improvement in productivity and making your Tableau slightly easier to read, your Tableau dashboard slightly easier to read. I've seen a lot of things in AI that are basically BI tools that are natural language interfaces to Tableau. And I'm like, Tableau's going to fucking have their own AI and you're not going to have a business anymore. This is not a real fundamental adoption of something that AI enables to solve an old business problem in a new way. And that's where I think the real value is created, is solving an old business problem in a new way that's somehow unlocked by this new technology. There's also another thing which, Neil, you made me think about, which I haven't figured out my opinion on yet. But many of these people that are talking about co-pilots, people are already talking about, okay, co-pilots are great, but eventually it's going to be agents talking to agents and you don't even fucking need the people anymore. And they're talking about it like it's going to be like a year or two from now. And are these co-pilots in at the end of, they're helping people make better decisions at the end of the day, interim solutions to agents talking to agents. And my initial thought about that now is that agents talking to agents is so much further away than anyone is saying in the media today that I can't even think about it. I don't think that happens in the 2 to 5 year time frame, and I don't think these co-pilots are not valuable long term. I think humans will need to be in the loop longer for more things than most tech people are prognosticating today, unless it's an incredibly simple thing, like in customer service, answering the same question 100 fucking times. The vast majority of things still require will for some time humans to make the final decision. I'm not a big believer that agents talking to agents are going to replace humans in the near term. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Martin, I had thoughts, but also additional question in a form of a question. So recently, I was talking to some of the senior folks at Microsoft who have been again with a Copilot, how they're looking at the adaption, what is going on in the space. And there was some pretty interesting discussion when I was talking to them. They said that they are seeing a really low adoption of the Copilot on the whatever they're actually launching. Enterprise side, they're seeing it's being picked up more and more, especially people using Teams and everything. But outside of that, when they look at the consumer part, completely low adoption, very low adoption, except for a few people who are using it, not being used. And he said, interestingly, he said, I wouldn't say it outside, but he said, even internally, they started doing some testing how it's being used inside of Microsoft, those who are using Microsoft product. And they said, except for top 5%, it was a really long tail. People are not using it even inside of it. So when you start thinking about agents talking to agents, think about even the early aspect of what is going on. So I would love to even get your assessment on that. There's lots of the ideas coming up from some of the startup ideas. How do you see that space in terms of the investment when you just any of the companies comes and talks to you about that?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. We ask the question again.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about when even Microsoft is saying that even with the excess of
Very low
the
adoption.
that they have, right? Very low adoption. So when you are looking at investing into this early stage pre-seed and they're coming up with these ideas about how they would end up helping drive some of this productivity gains and they'll be used by a large number of people, how do you actually value them or how do you think about what would end up driving adoption and that would be a good bet?
The last 2 or 3 companies that I invested in, they had a very clear ROI for their product, short-term ROI. For example, Grow AI. They have a case study where they went into one of their customers. The customer had 10 sales reps, 1 VP of sales. The average sales rep was about 30% of quota. They installed the software. After 3 months, the average sales rep was 100% of quota. And so they could prove that this real-time coaching actually increased salesperson productivity by 2x. And if you're able to deliver that kind of thing, that thing will sell itself. Because what you're doing is delivering top line growth to a company, and every company wants top line growth. And so if what you're delivering is not technology, not a question box that people may or may not use, but something that actually moves the needle on a KPI that the company cares about, I think that is much more investable. I don't like these companies that are like, you install my software and then you got to worry about adoption of the software. Every salesperson, they told them they had to use it, but then every salesperson ended up loving it because it helped them close more deals, which gave them a bigger bonus, and it self-fed itself. right? It wasn't something coming in from the top because it was something where salespeople were making a bigger bonus. So most of the companies I invest in are that kind of thing that have a very short term and quick ROI. For example, with Civic, they built this database and then they discovered, for example, the guy started in New Jersey and he started with the city of New Jersey and he extracted from their public records data all the vendors that sold to the city of New Jersey. And then he extracted all the contracts that they had and what their expiration dates were. And the first thing he did was to go to the existing vendors and say, I know your contract is expiring in 6 months. Do you know that there's this other contract for something that's similar that you might want to bid on that's coming up 3 months from now? So they surfaced up for the vendors like 10 new opportunities that their salespeople didn't even know about because they hadn't gotten the RFP or anything yet. And so those customers were so fucking happy because they're like, you just gave me 10 new potential contracts that I didn't know about within a week of signing up for your thing. They were like, this is crazy. Like, of course I'm gonna use this. So most of the applications I'm investing in are things like that have very near term, like within the first 30 days of using the software, material impact on the top line of the company.
That is actually something, Martin, that I've really noticed not only in my own career and business, but I think a lot of people try and take AI too much to consumer base and not inward reflection. So I've been running my business through just AI. Hey, these are my goals. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. What areas am I missing? What areas do I need to work? And it literally shit all over me and was like, hey, you suck at this. You suck at this. Hey, you're doing fantastic here. And I think that's thing business owners miss is because they're looking so far outwardly that if you start telling AI to do your job for you, yes, you're training it to eventually have the world take over and you no longer have a job, but like it's going to show you the short terms to get you the long-term wins.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that, Dustin. And actually, I know you're a real estate agent. Thanks for showing up to this today. One of the really interesting things that I saw in AI, again, it's what AI is really good at is taking a ton of unstructured data and creating a structure to it. And I saw one company that was helping home flippers find houses to buy and flip. And that is, again, a massive data set. There's thousands of homes on the market at any one time. But most home flippers have a particular model that they're looking for. They want to buy something at X per square feet and sell it for Y per square feet. They have a certain spread that they want to do. And they want to analyze all of that data and find the properties that fit their model for the discount to the fair value plus the upgrades and stuff like that. And that's something that AI is very good at that real estate agents are not that good at. Because real estate agents are like, I've got these 3 houses for sale. Do you want to buy them? But the buyer instead has a particular model that they're looking for. They can train the AI to look for that model and only show them the properties that match their particular model. And I think AI is going to do a lot to improve targeting for people doing things like residential real estate investing, for example, because that's a perfect use case of sifting through a ton of data, looking for a specific thing, and then help in shortening your pipeline of the kind of opportunities you look at.
I'd say there's actually one step above that, and that's identifying them before they get to an agent. Because being in the industry and knowing that probably 80% of deals get purchased before they ever hit the open market, and just because someone who knows someone, it's going to be getting in front of that. That's more important than necessarily just trying to track the deal. Because tracking the deal, most deals, once they hit the market, are not that great. They're usually overpriced because once you do hire an agent, you do get more money. That is just factually true as a seller, unless you've got a shitty agent. But identifying the deals before they become on the market, I think is going to be like that big eye opener.
So somebody's going to build something like that for real estate agents. Yeah, absolutely. Or for investors that are pre-market, that kind of thing. Yeah. Like this house last sold 20 years ago. The age of the person is probably in their 70s. They're highly likely to sell within the next 2 or 3 years, that kind of thing. The AI can find those properties that are not even listed. I agree. There's a lot of really interesting opportunities for AI discovery related to real estate. I think I have time for maybe one more question if anybody has it. Otherwise, I'll say thanks to everybody. No? All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking time, and follow me on Twitter if you want to hear more about what I think for pre-seed and everything. But have a good night.
Thanks for putting this together, Martin.
Okay.